Haley Smith. Having watched a recent Critical Q&A, I was struck that you openly called out Jackie Lacey. Not because it wasn't well-deserved, but because you weren't afraid to pull any punches. Having watched all of your catalog, I know that you have no time for sexism, but it got me wondering if your history in Scientology had an impact on your open-mindedness on equality. While I loathe most of what I learn about Scientology, something that has been interesting is that the progress has very little to do with life experience or gender. I'm just curious if you think critical thinking played more of a role, your lovely bride, or that you were exposed to the fact that people are potentially carrying a history of past lives in which they could have been anything/everything. I guess I'm asking if you think that one of the few good nuggets of Scientology is that people are not defined by their earthly bodies, but by their character, i.e. Thetan. Or if that became more apparent to you later after discovering critical thinking. Was there a fair amount of sexism in Scientology? Okay, thanks Haley for this question. This is interesting. I've mentioned before, and my experience of sexism in Scientology was almost non-existent to the degree that women were in charge more often than men. Women were in command positions and giving orders certainly out of the CMO and RTC all the damn time, right? There were way more women in RTC and way more women in CMO than there were men. And those were the organizations that were really the command structure of Scientology, right? They were the ones who implement David Miscavige's desires, wishes, and orders. And make of that what you will. Obviously, Miscavige has a thing for promoting women over men. Probably a male dominance thing on his part, I have no doubt, right? But I don't know if sexism is part of his game or not, but I kind of imagine it is, given the disparity between men and women at the level of RTC and the level of command personnel in Scientology, generally speaking. It's just an interesting thing that I've noted, and it's anyway, yeah. So I don't think that women are discriminated against in favor, in making them not have those roles in Scientology. Okay, and we never really thought much about men or women when it came to personnel. I did a lot of work with personnel in Scientology and the Sea Org, moving people around, transferring people to different posts, needing people to go do training, needing people for executive positions. And their gender was frankly just never, ever part of the consideration of why we would put somebody on a job. Just never even thought about it. So that's why, for me, my experience of it, even at the level of the Sea Org, where things suck really bad for all kinds of reasons, sexism wasn't really one of those reasons for me. Now, I am not going to say, though, that it doesn't exist or that nobody in the Sea Org ever experiences sexism, because I'm quite sure that there are people who come into the Sea Org with very sexist attitudes, and they carry those attitudes on into the Sea Org, because there isn't anything particularly telling you not to either. Hubbard doesn't anywhere say anything about, don't be sexist. He doesn't say those words anywhere. So anyway, I think if it got in the way, if it got weird, if somebody started acting weird or abusive or something like that within the world of the Sea Org attitude is pretty much, it's not a timid place. It's not a place for timid people. So women who come into the Sea Org generally, rise to the situation where they're not going to really particularly take a lot of shit from guys either, right? I mean, the equality's it is kind of there. It's kind of an interesting thing. Now, as far as my own upbringing or Scientology background, speaking to my current beliefs and ideas about this, I think it's probably a feature, not a bug, that I was raised with the idea that we are all the same in terms of being spiritual entities rather than being defined by our bodies. Because if you remove the body component out of it and you just look at a living human being, and you look at everybody as a living human being, okay, all human beings should have right to life, right to movement, right to thought, expression, right, etc., like these basic human rights. We should all have them. I mean, this is also pushed within Scientology. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not just given lip service. Sea Org members, Scientologists really believe in human rights. The problem, of course, is they can't think critically about Scientology and how it denies people human rights within its own walls. That's what they can't think critically about. But the idea of human rights and the idea of world peace based on everybody having a level playing field they can all operate from, called human rights, that's not a bug in the world of Scientology any more than it's a bug in the big wide world. It's a feature. It's a good thing. We should want everybody to get on board with human rights. And I did get on board with human rights while I was a Scientologist, and I carried that over. So when I came out into the big wide world and I looked around at what was going on, I went, well, this is a lot of bullshit, because this is denial of human rights, right? And that's not cool, and that's never been cool with me. So I think my upbringing probably did have a lot to do with that. I didn't grow up thinking that there were some people who are more equal than others. I didn't really come up thinking that way. And I never really bought into that whole idea. The elites and all of that. I bought into it, of course, with the Sea Org, though, of course. Actually, I got to rein myself in a little bit here, I certainly had my prejudices. But in the bigger picture of things, okay, yeah, sure, I had this idea that the Sea Org and Scientology were above everybody else, but not at the level of their rights. Even now, I have to stress this. I never imagined that just because I was a Scientologist or a Sea Org member that I had more rights than other human beings. I only imagined that I had more knowledge and more ability or more natural, not natural, but more spiritual awareness because of the fact that I was doing Scientology. But that didn't include I had more rights than other people. So even then. So that's kind of how I've always looked at it, always, my whole life. And I think that's how I'm going to keep looking at it. And I think that's where that comes from. So anyway, interesting question. Thanks for asking me about that.